Hey there, welcome to Empowered Astrology. I'm Christopher Mitchell. I'm here with Tom Jacobs, and today we're doing an episode on Pluto and the nodes of the moon. So we're going to give an overview of both of these topics, and then in future episodes, we'll aim to go deeper into exploring some of these areas as well, because there's a lot here. But to start off today, Tom, will you tell us a bit about how you understand Pluto in overview and how we can think about it in someone's birth chart, what it represents?
Yeah. So on the kind of first layer, we think about power, and I want to include in there this notion of what we believe power is, because I don't think it's enough to just say power. We have to kind of define our terms a little bit. But anyway, power, and also things under the surface that drive us. So any kinds of emotions or desires that we're not consciously in touch with, that are operational, and then we find ourselves doing something and saying, wait, why would I do that? So therefore also psychology and understanding the depths of a person's mind and heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a generic overview. Power, yeah, power, psychology, yeah.
Yeah, you want to say more about some of those areas?
Yeah. It's
Or
it's
unpack that a little further, I mean?
yeah, yeah, like it's I'm trying to be brief because of always going too far. So I'll trust you to kind of keep
Yeah,
me
yeah,
out of the
totally.
weeds.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay. Um, what we call shadow work. So something about the self you don't like, and you wish were not part of you. You don't know what to do with it. It could be a deep emotion, or it could be a desire, or it could be a how do you say, like pushing something away, or some reaction to something, and the reaction is super deep and intense. So some of the emotions include anger, which rage, jealousy, grief, resentment, revenge fantasies, things that may seem to threaten to overpower us. Like if I go into my psychic basement, is there a monster there who's going to take over? Well, I don't want to go down there then.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Pluto thing, whatever emotion it is. So it could be desire as well, or lust, or I want something, or I'll do anything to have this. That can be Pluto stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Deep
Yeah.
desires that,
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm. And unconscious material and intense feelings. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then, and you were saying, oh, go ahead.
Well, it's just anything that may from within you or outside you that you're afraid you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
There's a broad way to think of it, and so each of us might have an idea of what emotions we fear within ourselves, or desires, or anger, or what, you know. And so it's what you feel or fear you can't control, or if you'd go there, you'd get lost, and that you would be destructive, because Pluto, I wouldn't say in a person's chart it represents destructiveness, but it represents how we are essentially trying not to be bad people by losing ourselves to unhappiness or
Mm-hmm.
grief or disempowerment. And I'll say that when I talk about power, I like substituting strength and confidence for power. So what could, this is a sentence I like to use. Um, what do you need in order to give yourself permission to be totally confident? Like, what do you need? Like, what are you waiting for to just finally give yourself permission to just own who you are and do what you want to do? That can be a Plutonian thing, because conscious desire is Mars, but unconscious desire. So I really want this thing, and that will reveal some of those shadow things I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be obnoxious. I don't want to be greedy. I don't want to be selfish. Like all those Plutonian things can represent that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's this real kind of thing about there's empowerment, and there's potentially healthy power and confidence,
Totally.
and maybe positive desires or transformational
Yeah.
positive
Th-
transformation.
that's the other
But
word, transformation. Thank you.
mhm.
Yeah. Good.
But
Thank
then
you.
you also have all the intense stuff that comes up, like you got
Yeah.
empowerment and power, but you have disempowering feelings and fears and things that feel like blocks, and and etc. So, um, yeah. So I guess that you kind of get what I'm sorry. You get what I'm pointing to there. That like there's
Yeah,
hmm
it's not all negative. We sometimes assume from our the way we teach each other about Pluto and astrology
hmm
that it's negative. And I'd like to frame that in terms of there's also positive. And for me, the best of Pluto, like the most confident, healthy expression where I own what I want and I can achieve it without harming anybody. I think that's inherent in everybody already. But of course, we sometimes have fears, either based in reality in the past or just fears that we might do something destructive and we don't want to do those things, or what it might mean about me, the fears of what it might mean about me if I were to do that. So, transformation in the face of fear, transformation in the face of pain, fear and pain, guilt and shame are huge topics when we go deeper into Pluto. And so
hmm
transforming in the face of them. And many of us may have heard this kind of quote that says something like, courage. I'm messing it up totally. I don't know who said it. Could be from a movie or a real person. I don't know, but I'm paraphrasing. Um, Courage isn't um, not having fear. It isn't the absence of fear. It's making a choice or moving forward anyway.
hmm
And there's transformation in the face of what we feel disempowers us or something. So there's sometimes very deep work to go there. And we don't often do that, but I specialize in it.
hmm And I think that so that kind of gets into the psychological, unconsciousness, transformational, and shadow work aspects
Hmm.
that can come along with Pluto, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so I, I think it's fair to say that then that so that the so it can there can be discomfort or intensity or disempowerment or whatever else around this area of the chart, and we might want to avoid it or think that there's something, um,
Hmm.
or have work to do around it, but that it's not
Yes.
necessarily there's not necessarily something, but that ultimately it's a part of our chart that we want to transform and integrate.
If, okay, I would say a couple things. If you want to grow and improve, or if you have this, like if you want to use astrology so you can, understand people in a very deep way and yourself, I would say, yeah, you want to look at Pluto stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend having an experienced guide in the process. I mean, in a certain way, just like people might recommend if you were to pursue plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody were to pursue plant medicine, it's another world or accesses this other parts of you that you may not understand yet what to do with or how to function in another world. I would recommend, a psychopomp is how I think of it, like traveling between worlds. But yeah, if you want to overcome what makes you feel small or what makes you or keeps you feeling guilty or ashamed, and shame and guilt are two of the things that for me are the biggest inhibitors of spiritual growth or human consciousness growth, the raising of evolution or whatever. So it depends on what you want out of life, but more and more and more people are going into deeper ways with Pluto. In the broader category of evolutionary astrology, it's growing quite a lot, and a lot of people are drawn to it because there's a depth that can provide a sense of meaningful purpose when you understand why, just generically, why OCD, why when somebody puts a hand on my shoulder I jump 10 feet in the air, why am I terrified of authority figures, why, these things that can limit us in our living. Why do I doubt myself? Why does part of me can't imagine trusting my own decisions? If you want to move through those things and grow and feel confident and strong, yes, empowered. So I encourage people, I leave the door open, people wander in or stumble in or make a beeline into my office, so to speak. But yeah, I think it's so valuable, which is why, just for the listener, Chris is keeping us on track because I can talk about it for hours and hours and hours. And so we're just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha. So there's a journey that can be taken there. It can be chosen to be taken there, or that might call us in at a certain
Yeah.
pace, but also recognizing that that it's plutonic work and that there's a lot to it, and going into it consciously, as we're ready to.
Yeah. And think about, just for a moment briefly, think about the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and how that is a great model for what if something in the unconscious takes over and is destructive. Well, what if this has just occurred to me. I've never thought about this before, but what if they made friends? What if they understood each other? And what if they had an agreement? And what if the monster, Mr. Hyde, what if there were certain ways that they had agreed upon to have everybody's needs met without havoc, without destruction, without terrible things? What if? And that sense of, let me meet the shadow and make an understanding, so I'm not driven by the terror that I might turn into a monster. And I think everybody in some way may relate to that idea, like anger or grief or jealousy, or why did that person get the promotion and I didn't? Whatever it is, like even good-hearted, wise, sane people may have this niggling thing that comes up and is like, oh, I can't let that go. So I think all of us realize that, and we're moving into a time where becoming empowered as an individual is just very, very important.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that connects into the idea of shadow work, and what we're talking about here is the idea of shadow work, right?
Yeah.
And then so this empowerment or transformation journey that can be taken with Pluto, or this process of shadow work, or whatever you want to call it, engaging with this plutonic material. What does that journey look like, and how can we work with it as we choose to, and as we're or how can we work with it?
Yeah.
I guess I'll just leave it there. Like, how can we work with that?
Yeah. First of all, we judge no part of us. We learn the power of holding compassionate space, that some parts of us are so hurt or feel denied certain experiences and are bent out of shape. Does that mean we should fear ourselves, or monsters are terrible, or we are monsters? No. So it starts with a non-judgment, compassionate awareness kind of approach. I got a lot from for this kind of mindset. I got a lot out of like 15 books by Sherry Huber, who's a Buddhist teacher. Sherry, Cheri, Huber is Hub like boy, Er. She's not talking astrology or Pluto, but she's talking about compassionate awareness and witnessing parts of self. And anyway, when I read those almost 20 years ago, I was like, something very important here. Anyway, so you first judge nothing, but then you learn that what the parts that we might think of as shadows really need is acceptance and love. We've denied them light of acknowledgement, so they retreat into the shadows and become little mole people, with sharp little teeth, and are afraid to be seen. If we love them, not saying you can do anything you want, but if we understand the humanity, the processes that create a shadow. Why would I have an anger so intense that I would judge it? Where could that come from? And so this perspective of witnessing and listening, and I include some journalistic, objective methods of, mainly journaling, but you can just talk it out too, but listening to what those parts say, and again, without judgment. Mm-hmm. And in that space, it's not just knowing what you think you could do, and it's not sensationalizing, ooh, I think I'm dangerous. It's not anything like that. It's bringing acceptance to where the malfunctions or misshapen crap comes from. Mm-hmm. When you do that, it's not, because I'm super clear, it is not enough to just say, oh, this person's shadow thing is a lot about blah, blah, blah. No. you have to make friends, make nice with those parts while not judging them, because then they start to relax, and whatever they're passionate about become your assets. They become your allies.
And,
there's many longer stories we can look at months down the road, but sorry, I feel like there's one more little detail.
yeah.
So, so you know what that part of you is afraid of doing, and you say, okay, I'm in charge. I'm actually in charge, and I welcome you. I'm not choosing to do that. Thereby, you're accepting and you're loving while you're kind of robbing the power. You're kind of taking away the power, because the pain and whatever makes the malfunction come up doesn't persist. For example, anger and rage have roots in pain. So if you're willing to look at the pain behind anger and rage, this part of you will melt, because that part of you, it takes so much energy to hold anger and rage. And the part needs to be understood and heard and validated. Then you change the thing. So I teach people to ground cords into the earth, be the energy of the earth. And it's not meditation for like kumbaya, hoping for the best purposes. It's actually strengthening your consciousness, expanding your consciousness so you can handle when intense emotions come up. And so I have a lot of techniques and tools to do that. And that's where my focus is a lot of the time.
Yeah, so I think there's a really key piece there, which is the not that in this area, this Pluton, the Pluto part of the chart, or with Pluto transits or whatever, there can be intense stuff there, or parts of self that we that feel unintegrated or monstrous or twisted up in some way. Like the shadow work that's there to do, that it's not expressing into conscious choice parts of us that are all over the map in terms of what they're thinking and feeling and wanting and etc. But it's holding space to feel and understand and hold all of that, so that it can transform, so that shadow work can happen, and so that the shadow can kind of melt away, and we can find out what's underneath those energies, or what's behind those energies.
You welcome back the part of self who has carried this emotional malfunction without judgment. I say malfunction, we would typically judge that. You might even say dysregulation, or the part of who has felt bent out of shape, or has felt there are no other options. And like, you're not hearing me, world, right? And some of those people explode in anger and violence. They feel unheard and not validated. And that, guns in America, a totally other big topic that's related to this. Not the guns, but the availability of guns for people who are, Roy Wood Jr., who's a comedian, who's one of the correspondents on The Daily Show. I think it was just a year ago, right after the Uvalde shooting, in late May of last year, he did a segment where he said, instead of focusing on gun stuff, let's focus on getting lonely white men friends. A friend for every white man is how he was saying it. And it was a poignant thing, but funny. And it was like making sure that they can't get lost in their thoughts of loneliness and unhappiness, and just get him a friend. Legislate like a Big Brother program is basically what he was saying. And it was like for lonely white men in their 20s and 30s and teens. So I just find that that's just such an important thing, because parts of us will act out in different ways. It's not always extreme as that kind of violence, but it's rarely not that extreme. But that sense of like, I think you'll judge me because of my desire or my need or my emotion or something. So it's important work.
And there's fears and disempowerment and insecurities and other things like that in the mix too, right? It's not just like outward aggressive expression, but it's also manipulation and desperation and fear-based behaviors and behaviors that come from twisted up self-image or ideas of disempowered ideas about the self or the other or the world or whatever. And it's all that, it's all the host of things that can come out of disempowerment.
Yeah, for sure. So we look at what makes you feel small, what makes you feel guilty, what makes you feel ashamed, all the disempowerment stuff. Where do you perceive you have failed or made a choice that proved to you shouldn't trust yourself? And we just kind of go through all that stuff step by step. And that's, for me, I call it conscious shadow work, because you're doing loving self-accepting, loving things in this space, not just saying, yeah, I'm afraid I might hurt somebody, or I'm afraid I would do something terrible,
Mm-hmm. And so then
When you're
go ahead.
Well, when you were talking about this image, the manipulation, and how hard I worked as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
I was not terrified of the dark, but I was afraid of losing consciousness. Therefore, for several years, every night I was afraid to go to bed, to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember manipulating my mom in various ways to have her stay longer, sitting on the edge of the bed, telling me stories, talking to me, whatever. Like, I manipulated the heck out of her until one day, when I think I must have been like 9 or something, she was like, wait a minute. And she figured it out. And, but anyway, that sense of like what lengths I would go to not have to be alone. And that was totally my Pluto in the 12th, like afraid of losing consciousness. And I was terrified of the void. I mean, it sounds really silly, but I was like a little kid just terrified to lose consciousness. And it happened every day. And so what would I do to make sure I didn't have to be alone? And there I was manipulating the heck out of her. Anyway, it just made me think of that, because I try not to manipulate people because I have that such a strong memory of behaving from that place,
Mm-hmm.
She's a trooper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the longings or the desires, the empowerment that's wanted around this plutonic part of the part of the chart
Mm-hmm.
represented by Pluto, then as we do this work, potentially as we work with this plutonic stuff, those expressions that seem like shadow can transform into healthy forms of empowerment and healthy expressions. Like, maybe the person thinks that they like need to fight against someone else, but as they become more empowered in themselves, they realize that like what they really want is to be able to let themselves like access more of life or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that example tracks quite the way I meant it to, but I was reaching for something like that,
You're talking about the like external, what I'm fighting externally. If I accept more of what's going on internally, I fight outside less. Is that the idea you're kind of getting to?
Let me just find an example to illustrate the point. It's just something like in any case, it's just like that, that we can find healthy expressions of,
for sure,
that part of the chart.
That's right.
That don't need to, like, it's not about denying that area of ourselves or of life.
That's right.
It's about working out the stuff around it and in order to unlock that healthy expression of it and have it in healthy self-empowered ways.
For sure. There's always, and this is, of course, Chris, as you know, this is the basis of the whole podcast venture together here. There's always a healthy way to find to express things. There's always a full range of possibilities. On one end, not so healthy. On the other end, healthy. That's the idea of empowered astrology. That's why we call it this, and that's the whole idea here, is to figure out, if it's not working, how can we change our choices and expressions? And so even with Pluto, yes.
Mm-hmm. And with that Pluto part of the chart, that might be where we feel like this is wrong, or there's blocks here, or it's disempowered here, or things are too intense here, or whatever. And so there's more to work through there potentially, or there's a certain type of work to be done there.
Yeah.
But that part of the chart, that area of life, can still be integrated and experienced in healthy ways.
Totally.
But there's that Pluto work to do around that energy for that person.
Yeah. And if someone listening to this hasn't experienced it in Tom's workshop, you can start to get a flavor of it. Start with judging nothing about what you feel or want or fear. Judge no feeling, like content, or the fact that you feel, the content, or how deeply you might feel it, or how hard it is sometimes to work through things and face things. Judge none of that, and you'll get a taste of how this can kind of potentially stretch you open, because all the doors in the house can open and you get to be whole and complete and fully expressed.
And then from that non-judgment place, or from that place of willingness to be to go inward with that view, then we can do the work to help clean things up, or to become
That's right.
To sort out that Pluto stuff.
That's right.
To do that
That's
Plutonic
right.
work.
For sure.
Cool. So this Plutonic work of engaging with this part of ourselves where there can be fears and disempowerment, shadow to work through, like mixed up ideas of what power is, like etc. As we work with that part of ourselves, or as that part gets activated, is there always more that is waiting to come out of it, or can we get to the place where we've fully transformed it? Is it like an endless well, or is there a set amount of work to do with it?
Steve Forrest uses this. He says, is there anything in your unconscious you're not yet aware of? So because the unconscious is vast, and the unconscious connects, in your unconscious are the connections between all of your different lives. So is it endless? Maybe not endless, but if we work on stuff constantly, we'll never get through all the details. But we learn these techniques that I teach, and we can apply them to each and every one that comes up. So I don't want to say it's endless, but I don't want someone to think that, I healed my daddy issues and I'm done. Regarding Pluto or whatever it is. There are many layers of things. And even like somebody is dealing with anger as a Plutonian problem, or grief, or anything. Let's say that person works through 3 or 4 things over a couple of years, and it's amazing, and the person feels triumphant, and we should give that person 10 gold stars, legit. Something else that makes that person angry will get activated, of an entirely different nature, because a different life has a different story, a different past life than they've already processed, or emotional thing will have happened. So even if you don't think about reincarnation, just stuff in the world, stuff in our lives, something else may trigger it for a different reason later. So it is, the possibilities and the layers are multitudinous. The possibilities are vast and almost endless. But there are certain categories of things that will recur, and things that I find, this is unjust. And that could be a bunch of different things, but I'll get angry in response to it, or whatever, or grief and loss, or whatever. Yeah. So there's a lot buried in there. And so what I try to do is always, in everything I do, provide and teach techniques you can master, because the stuff seems like it never ends.
But generally we can get more empowered around that. We can start to understand more. So when something shows up, it might be a new corner of it, or a new compartment of it, a different dimension of it, but we can have a more of an understanding of how to engage with that Pluto work, and how to do that healing empowerment work. And in that way, the process itself can transform as we engage with it. Yeah.
I mean, just generally, really briefly, a lot of people have heard me talk about this because I've told students, I've done stuff on YouTube, and so I'm not like, spilling my guts here, but I process through several kinds of situations, other life memories, essentially, where grief and loss of family was the big thing. And I think there were 4 big chunks of it. And I started to feel really good, or maybe 3. And when I felt really good and I was giving myself a gold star, a 4th kind came up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that this stuff keeps going. And now there's like a different thing, which is about a completely different thing about life, where I'm having these intense feelings and crying a lot and processing these memories from other lives. And so it's like, okay, great. So there's another module. It's a completely different emotion. So some of us are not wired or experienced in certain ways to access all that, but some of us are. And, but you can just look at the themes you're dealing with and what you react to in the world.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yes, there are Plutonian things that I don't want to say it's endless, but it can seem that way. So we have to take time to rest if we're on a healing path, not think that overdoing it is noble.
I think
That's
here's
really
where we can
important.
bring in that empowered astrology view a little bit, because an example that's coming up for me is like the idea of, somebody goes to undergraduate school and then gets a master's degree and then gets a PhD, and then there's continued training later down the line. And not everybody takes this kind of path, but I think it's a good
That's right.
example, or like kind of a way to think about how life can evolve. And like when one is in a PhD program, they might be engaging with classes or work or some kind of research that is new levels of challenging compared to what
That's
they were
right.
dealing with in freshman year, but
That's
they've
right.
also every step along the way developed their capacity as a in their with as a student,
That's right.
as an empowered person to meet the challenges that continue to
Hmm.
evolve as they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess let's take a look at how Pluto looks in transit
Okay.
compared to natally. So we've been talking about like natal Pluto. This is the Pluto in the
Hmm.
birth chart and what can be associated with it. What about transiting Pluto? How would you think about that differently?
Yeah. So you're minding your own business, and Pluto comes around and says, "Are you strong enough to face XYZ?" So Pluto actually asks you, and my model of this I steal from Steve Forrest. I'm happy to give him tons of credit for all the things that I stole from him or borrow. But the idea of transiting planets ask questions, like life is asking you questions, but let's understand the Pluto as a teacher wants you to uncover something from deep within and become stronger. So it says, "Are you strong enough to handle this?" And you either say yes or no, and then it keeps pressing because it wants you to decide you're strong enough. And Pluto transits, of course, can have a terrible reputation because some difficult things happen, of course. But it's just like the death card in the tarot. It's not literal always. Sometimes it is, but probably more often than not, Jupiter transits are maybe literally about death, about letting something go and moving on. But something is trying to disintegrate. Be warned that when Pluto comes around, something is trying to die. Something is trying to leave, and Pluto's saying, "Can you rebuild in the face of it?" I like this example. It's kind of a lot of my students have heard this. I'm sure my Pluto videos on my YouTube channel will talk about this too. But the idea of like you're minding your business and Pluto comes along with two bulldozers and gives you a hard hat and says, "Hey, these buildings over here, those 4 out of those 5 buildings, they're gone." And you say, "I live in that house." And Pluto says, "Trust me, when it's gone, you'll rebuild, but you don't really know what's better till the thing that no longer works is gone."
Hmm.
So there can be this time when something is destroyed, and then we're like feeling bereft or disempowered or sad or whatever. But then we realize what maybe we should rebuild in its place.
Hmm. And
And
you
yes,
use the
this is very
example
hard.
of the phoenix a lot, with
Yes,
it being reborn from its own ashes, and that's a
that's
very
right.
plutonic symbol.
Yeah.
Um,
Because what it really means is that bird serpent thing just got burned alive
mhm.
and then it regenerated. So it can feel that sense of feeling like we're being destroyed, being burned alive.
Does it
Like,
always? Mhm, go ahead.
yeah, there's an example I want to use,
Hmm.
which is Pluto transits to the moon. Just generically, the moon can represent, on one level, what you do to make yourself happy, but also what makes you feel secure. And so Pluto coming to someone's moon in different aspects can actually, as a challenge, so you become more aware of what you think will make you safe. It may challenge relationships that make you safe. You have a disagreement with your closest family member. Your friend says, look, I don't know if I can be your friend anymore. Something happens with your house, and then the landlord's going to double the rent, and you're like, what? So you're in the middle of tension, but Pluto's saying, can you handle it? What do you think security is? Here are these challenges. And so we may perceive everything's going wrong when we're being asked to really understand more about our unconscious assumptions and dealing with the things in 3D.
And all of this for the sake of empowerment and transformation and our highest good, and like the the ability to become more conscious, more empowered, more connected, and of who we really are, right?
Yeah. So, and Pluto transits can make us aware of the foundation of something in our lives. We didn't realize we built it on something shaky. And if we don't need it, it might go away during a Pluto time, but we may be sentimental or attached to it.
So is it always bulldozer, death card, transformation through loss or having something taken away, or can there be other ways that plutonic transformation shows up as well?
Yeah. There can be kind of like you can be called upon to dig deep where it may not be a threatening situation or a loss situation. But those are very easy vehicles for Plutonian energy. But it can also be being challenged to admit and tell a deeper truth than you've ever done before. Or really understand why you do what you do. So it can be lots of situations that call that out and maybe confront you. Maybe it's not about loss or grief or death or whatever, but a lot of times it is. But it may not be. And I don't want to paint the picture that I never try to scare anybody, and I'm not a fear monger, or that's not what I'm into. I don't find it. I always say I'm a Scorpio, but I'm not, like, I don't think telling you danger is sexy or something. I'm not titillated by making you afraid, like I'll watch a scary movie if I need that energy. But trying to get to a deeper truth, and this is part of it for sure. I don't know if I can do that. That's the general frame. I don't know if I can let go of, my friend and my mom, my home and my job. I don't know, what the moon idea or what makes me feel secure. I don't know if I can let go of all that money or whatever. Like, I don't know if I can. And Pluto says, hint, hint, you can. Just decide you can. Yeah.
If I can handle feeling that. And I think I'm just not avoiding the depths of possibility with Pluto, but also not wanting to fix a fearful or a fixed idea of what that always looks like. I know that, like, some of the I think the Jeffrey Wolf Green people, they talk about like several different ways that Pluto shows up. One of them being loss, one like being, and this is not exact, I don't actually have it memorized, but it's like loss, change,
yes,
being like, it can be like facing something that we haven't been ready to face, or like being asked to work with something that we haven't felt ready to work with. And then there can also be like things showing up that challenge us to that challenge all the plutonic reasons why we can't accept, or like an opportunity or something too. So like, just to see the broad category of deep transformational work being asked to be done around the part of the chart that Pluto is transiting.
What you made me think of an example when you went through that, and one is like this amazing new job opportunity because there's a new head of the department, and that person marches in and says, "You, chart holder, you're amazing. I would love to mentor you." And you're like, "That's awesome." And 3 weeks in, you realize, and you're in it. You accepted the opportunity, and you realize that person reminds you of a family member who hurt you 3 decades ago, and you're like something's being pulled out. It's an amazing, opportunity, but maybe you have this challenge to face the thing under the surface, where nothing negative is happening, but you're forced or you're caused to dig deep and face something from the past that was hurtful. Yeah. So you made me think of that image of like this great new opportunity, and the person who's offering it reminds me of my cruel uncle or my mean mom or whatever, and you have to deal with that psychological thing as this change and opportunity can be really amazing. Anyway.
So
Yeah.
the unprocessed, unconscious,
Yeah.
stuff to be worked with.
Definitely.
And in our birth charts, there's the native placement that is the deep, kind of personal well of
Yeah.
lifelong of Pluto stuff. But then as Pluto moves around, it'll also say, and here's the unconscious stuff in this area, and here's the
That's right.
unconscious stuff in this area,
That's
and
right.
here's something that brings stuff up about this. And so
That's right.
the and yeah, and so seeing all the ways that shows up, and
I think it gets easier over time if you understand this distinction between what the culture has taught us power is versus creating self-respect as a form of strength and power and confidence. It gets easier because then you're not, you feel lost differently if you understand you're not being punished because you're lame or weak or stupid or something. We don't talk like that to each other, but our culture does. Like this person failed. This person was. We have that image of people who, for example, there's a stigma for some people with bankruptcy, when for other people it's a chance to step back, pause things, reorganize, and start on a better foot. And it's just, the stigma of things. If you lose a bunch of money or something, we feel disempowered. Anyway, you learn how to unravel some of those things that leave lasting marks about empowerment, disempowerment.
I'm feeling some of the medicine I want to bring in here as you say that, because part of me is like, oh, bankruptcy is not even a loss,
Okay.
and it's
Right.
like, and there's the as we move through the idea of loss, or the idea of change, or the idea of
Yes.
facing deep unconscious stuff, the ideal, potentially, I'm proposing that the empowerment, the transformation in that can be getting to the point of realizing, oh, I was so afraid of this, or I was so afraid to feel this affected me so deeply, and it wasn't, on some ultimate level, it's nothing's actually gone, or nothing's actually
Yeah.
lost, or
Yeah.
it's only left me, positively transformed. And even, there's teachings out there that would say, even with death, even with the things that we most fear, that we can get to. And, and I'm human, and we're human, and sometimes we feel this way, and sometimes we feel it on other levels, but it's reaching towards that place of understanding,
Yes.
like deep empowering truths about loss is an illusion, and like fear is unnecessary, and everything is, held in love, and all these kind of soul qualities that are being cultivated through these challenging experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And that change is inevitable along the path that you're describing. Yeah. Change will occur. Yeah. 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 About bankruptcy, because I teach a class called Energy as Money as Energy. And so these stories can sometimes stick in my head. When I was a teenager, I had a friend whose family declared bankruptcy. He's a couple years older than me. For me, it was just like this thing that somebody would read on the news, and it was a tragedy, and somebody would have shame. And so I was like, oh man, that's terrible. I didn't understand what it meant. Oh, it meant like you're out of money and you're kind of up against the wall and you're kind of screwed and your life's going to get ruined because and you don't have a choice. This is the only thing you can do, and your life is ruined. And like a year, and I don't know what their reasons for that were, but a year later or 15 months later, they had bought like a restaurant franchise, and the kid had a new car, and I was like, what? Like I didn't
Yeah.
understand that at all, where they understood what it was, but I was believing that black mark thing.
Hmm.
Just my own stuff about money, my family stuff about money or whatever. I had never heard of bankruptcy as a tool or an option to kind of stop a bad situation. Anyway, so that example sticks with me because I was genuinely perplexed that my friend had this shiny new car, and I was like, what? I never talked with him about it because people don't often talk about money issues, especially kids don't
People don't
understand
talk
what.
about plutonic stuff, and I
Yeah.
think this is and that's where some of the trick of it lies, or something,
Hmm.
that it feels so, uh, dark and disempowering, and like it's
Yeah.
the worst fear, and everything's gonna go wrong. And then you move through an experience and the bankruptcy thing is like there can be the shift of perspective of like, whoa, is this a failure? Is this that something is shameful? Is this that my life is over? Or was
Hmm.
this a lesson in like forgiveness and release, and
Mm.
healing
Right.
that was allowed to me through an experience that I wouldn't have otherwise let myself have? Did this
Yeah.
come in and let me make a change that I wasn't, um, that has left me more on my soul path or something?
Just as a side note, I get a lot of mileage out of this podcast called How I Built This. I think the host's name is Guy Raz. And he brings on entrepreneurs, and it's invariable that they have failed multiple times. And I listen to this because as an entrepreneur, and I'm always trying to figure out like a sole proprietorship, basically, like I'm just a dude, doing readings, but trying to always figure out new ways of doing things. But I realized a few weeks ago, I really use it for when they talk about what they did wrong and how they didn't either give up or didn't beat themselves up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea of like, okay, the way I did that, it didn't work. What do I let that mean about me? And with Pluto stuff, it's like, then all the money was gone. We had to start over. Or then the reputation was ruined and we had to start over. That sense of the phoenix burned alive in the fire and then started over. And some of these people have like multiple stories of all the things that went wrong, and they all have this humility where we could be talking about multi-million or billion-dollar company, but they learned through doing it. And anyway, I find that really inspirational to keep myself from judging when stuff doesn't work. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel defeated to not defeat myself. You know what I'm saying? Like when
Mm-hmm.
I feel something doesn't work, let me say, okay, it doesn't work. It just fits with the whole like the bankruptcy idea. Like, is it a loss of everything and power, or is it a part of a process of becoming stronger? And anyway, I love that podcast for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like one of my favorite episodes was the Chobani yogurt guy, this Turkish a guy who came to America. And anyway, the point is that like things didn't work, and then something worked, and then things didn't work, and then something worked. It just kept going. There's a resilience in Pluto too if we don't defeat ourselves through shame and guilt and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. The Uranian and Sagittarian parts of me want to, or elements of me want to even take it to the place of, and we're working with it at the point in evolution that we're working with it, and seeing these things through the lens that like we individually and collectively are at,
Mm-hmm.
and but that there could be potential as we evolve in consciousness, that the very tenor or like, of or game board of this stuff itself changes,
Mm-hmm.
and that we learn, that more empowered, more advanced, more conscious beings, as we become that individually and collectively, the all the stuff that we have wrapped up with these plutonic ideas and things like
Mm-hmm.
fear and loss, that our relationship to all of that might be able to continue to change and evolve, so that we
Mm-hmm.
continue, so that our experience of these kinds of things, our perspective on them itself, can change as we become more empowered and conscious in relation to them. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
part of what the purpose of engaging with the journey is to find that and
And
realize
Pluto
that.
says your friend is truth, whether in transit or natally. More truth, more transparency, which is hard because we might be embarrassed or ashamed about something. And so in just what you said, the evolution for a human or for a group of people can be more transparency, more truth. And so Pluto says, this is like, I want you to understand why you do what you do and own it.
Mm.
Like, okay, yes, I said that thing because here's my motivation. And yeah, I'm a little humbled by that. And not feel defeated if it was something like, I wanted to sound smart, or I wanted to be the loudest person in the room or whatever, or I felt insecure, so I was compensating. Yeah, and so Pluto says I feel like we're getting close to the end of Pluto, so I'm kind of wrapping it up a little
We
bit.
are, yes.
Is that, yeah. So Pluto says, okay, great, more truth, and truth, even if it hurts. And regarding, just zapping back to the natal placement idea, I tell people whenever someone does her Pluto well, someone else is uncomfortable. Like, it's a guarantee that you ruffle feathers and you push people's buttons, you make people uncomfortable when you do your Pluto well. So if you're honest about yourself or everything else, somebody's going to be upset, and it's actually part of the growing process. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of Pluto for now. We'll come back
I
to
know.
it at some point.
We're
I'm
not
sure.
even close to the halfway point. So yeah, good. We'll come back after the basics are done.
What was that question I asked? Like how deep does that well go? Can it keep coming out? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot to talk about there. But another thing that there's a lot to talk about that is also very interesting, and we will segue now to the nodes of the moon. And I think, just to start out, let's break down what are the nodes of the moon, because with a planet, we're talking about Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, something. It's a rock or some gas, or it's a large body out there in space. But the nodes of the moon are kind of different. And my understanding is that what they are is they're a mathematical point where the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun meets the plane of the moon's orbit around the Earth.
Exactly.
And there's 2 points, one where it's ascending or going over the plane, and the other where it's descending and going underneath the plane.
Because those planes are not parallel. Yes, exactly.
It sounds a little abstract, but it's like very real mathematically, and has shown throughout a lot of traditions and through my own experience to be very significant astrologically. So whether or not you can get your head around the math is to understand that they are these kind of that's how we get to them, and then we can talk about how they work astrologically. But what we got with those with the math there is we have the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon.
The planes, yeah, exactly. Where it goes up, where the moon goes up, that's the north node. When it goes down on the other side, it's the south node. Yeah, you got it. Yep. And no one knows why these meanings that we're going to talk about are. Nobody knows why it works. Like nobody knows. It's just partly from tradition, partly I've offered some new ideas too. But yeah, nobody knows why it works. Which to me is so amazing. When you can talk about something and people's experiences and kind of correlate a bunch of stuff to it, and people say, doing nodal analysis, you know me better than anybody I've ever met, and you've never met me. Nobody knows why it is this way. But essentially, the transiting south node seems to be, and I'm going to say that over and over again because, again, we don't know why it works, seems to be this repository of emotional memories from all of our past lives or different lives. Or if you're not into reincarnational approach, you can think of it as indicative of conditioning environments from birth. So something about family of origin and by extension community it's attached to. The north node is the opposite. And they are not, while they are as points, they are equal. In quality of experience, they're the opposite of each other. So one is conditioned always to overdo the south node because it's a familiar zone of familiarity or a habit place, a comfort zone. So we retreat to the south node. We overdo the south node. We sometimes are not even aware that we're seeing the world through the south node as a lens all the time. Most of us are not aware of this. We expect the world to be like this, so we therefore keep finding it to be like that. It's kind of a funny thing. And then the north node is the opposite. We're not familiar with it. We're not accustomed to it. We probably don't prefer it because it's the literal opposite of what's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So I often think of one kid on a teeter-totter on a playground. The south node is overweighted on one end, like the south node end is overweighted. And the kid doesn't care like what's on the other side. He's just sitting there. Of course, we would aim for movement to be healthy and balanced, but the kid doesn't care. The kid is fine sitting there and doing nothing. So all the weight is on the south node. And then somebody comes along, a person you meet as a teenager, as an adult, a relationship partner or something, and says, you could try this other way of being also. And then we say, I'd prefer not to. I was thinking about Bartleby. I'd prefer not to. Over and over again. I don't want to do that. I prefer not to. But we attract teachers, but people in our families can't teach us that because their souls agreed not to show us that way of being. That's for later too, but I wanted to point that notion.
So the south node of the moon, and part of like I'm a little caught on to something from a few minutes ago where, again, the Sagittarian Uranian parts of me want to say, we nobody knows how it works, but maybe we could, or maybe some
Sure.
channeled being might, or like I never like to limit that, like what's possible for us to
Sure.
because 1,000 years ago nobody knew how gravity worked either, right? And so it's like
That's right.
I think
But
totally
I haven't heard
possible.
anybody explain it.
Yeah, I feel like I have some sense of it, but I'm not ready to articulate it myself either. So
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
But we haven't reached some consensus about it.
Right.
But we have over time arrived at some ways to think about them that seem to work.
Yeah. As far as the mythology,
Mm-hmm.
the ancient Indians had an explanation for why it is the way it is, but that is a unique system that's that you and I don't study, and so we're certainly not expert in it. But there is a mythological explanation in a way, but as far as Western astrologers, evolutionary astrologers, there isn't a standard paragraph that comes with it to explain why it is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the south node has to do with what's really familiar to us and our conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
and then the north node has to do with what is not yet familiar to us or not integrated in our experience yet.
Right. So I would say beware of teachings that say dump the south node, live the north node, because what's really healthy is to come out of the imbalance,
Mm-hmm.
to learn to integrate. You use that word, integrate both. So we're not, and remember they're opposites. So you can't do both at the same time, but you can learn to live in balance and kind of go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the questions I have, which is, do we want to leave the south node behind entirely, or move on for it, or become entirely the north node by the end of this lifetime,
Yeah.
or is it about balance and integration between the two?
Yeah, balance and integration. Because you've seen the best and worst of the south node symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
You've been all around the block. You've seen all the best and worst. And so the task for any individual is to sort through the healthy expressions and healthy versions of Virgo 7th house or Leo 3rd house, whatever. To sort through whatever sign and house it is. But to sort through it, carry forward what really works, because you're expert at it. You've done it over and over and over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So it's normal for you and you have expertise. So it's good to carry it with you, but not get lost in excesses or imbalanced ways of expressing it.
Mm-hmm. Because
my south node's, I'll just use a quick example.
Mm-hmm.
My south node's in Cancer in the 10th house.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say south node in Cancer. Seeing the world through the lens of emotion and needs, right? And moment to moment feelings. Well, I'm really good at helping people with their emotions. It's kind of what I do. But I can go too far with it if I don't have good boundaries. If I let people kind of put codependent hooks in me and follow me around, and I'm dragging them around. So there are ways to do it well and healthy, and I got to make sure I keep an eye on those tendencies and not get lost in overdoing the wrong things or unhealthy things. So that's just one example. But you can think of the healthy parts of any sign or any house, the behaviors in the house, and you have to. The challenge is to keep an eye on those things because you've done the best and worst of them. So how can you not get too lost in the unhealthy versions?
But we do want to bring the healthy parts forward.
That's right. That's right.
Not disown it entirely, while also then finding our like healthy ways to do the other aspect. And if we haven't fully unpacked it, but the nodes always come in opposition. So if one's in Capricorn, the other's in Cancer. If one's in Sagittarius, the other's in Gemini.
Yeah,
They
exact
always form an
opposite to the
opposition.
degree and the minute. Yes, thank you. We forgot that. Thank you. Yep.
So, how can one do the South Node stuff in a healthy way without getting lost in it, given that there's so much excess there?
Yeah. So the excess is in habit or assumptions about what the world should be like or is like. So this is what I recommend to people all over the world. I recommend reading not one or two keyword lists, but like as many as you can get your hands on. What astrologers say about the sign of Capricorn or about the sign of Cancer or whatever the signs are. Reading those keyword lists and really just being discerning and critical and saying, okay, yeah, that's a great Capricorn quality. Okay, I get that. Oh, that's a not so happy Capricorn quality, not so healthy. And getting not just 3 or 4 ideas, but like a lot of ideas. So you can say, aha, I can sort through this. So in your mind, you can like make these categories and columns and sort through it. And then you can notice in your behavior what are the things that you often do. But because again, with South Node overdoing stuff, we're not aware of it sometimes.
Because it's the water that the fish swims in. I almost feel like I want to do
right.
another pass on like what the South Node, what the North Node is.
Yeah.
That like the South Node, and explore that in a little more depth. Like
Okay.
I've thought of I often think of the South Node as being like the water that the fish swims in, and it doesn't even realize is its worldview, is its conditioning,
Right.
is how it thinks things are or thinks things should be, because often the South Node represents what one grows up within.
Yes.
And so it's like the culture, the family unit, the ways of thinking, ways of
That's
being
right.
that are really conditioned for a person, and
That's
it can be
right.
hard to even see that they are
That's
the
right.
conditioning.
Like the people who were already there when you were born had certain thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, and feelings that defined their worldview. And at one point, each of them was tiny person who was impressionable. So the root chakra is imprinted upon birth with what everyone around you is thinking and feeling. And then you grow up in that incubator, unaware, like the fish in the water, unaware that there are other things. So you think about the South Node as this repeated signaling, this repeated messaging. That's what I want to say. This is what the world is like. This is what money is worth. This is what we think about art or God or education or the neighbors or people with different skin colors or God. This is what we think about all these things. And you're like 2 months, 4 months, a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old going, Oh, okay, great. And then you're raised within it. Then you see the opposite, and they're telling you to try to protect you probably. Oh, those people. We don't ever want to be like those people. And you're like, oh, okay, sure, thanks. Yeah, okay. So there's that sense of being told not to do the opposite. That's common in everybody's life, right? Because whatever your parents are teaching you, they want to make sure that you're safe. They don't want you to veer off into the opposite and take unnecessary risks or whatever. So they're always telling you, this is who we are. Don't be like those other people. And it doesn't mean they're hateful or mean or cruel-spirited or bigots or anything. It just means that they're like trying to tell you who we are. And Yeah. And so then you go to an astrologer or you have a friend or a dating partner, and that person's like, oh, but you could also like do this other thing sometimes. And you're like, oh, I would never be like that kind of person. And then our biases and our assumptions and the imbalances are revealed.
Mm-hmm. And so in that
Yeah.
in that growing up within it and being conditioned or potentially having conditioning, imprinting, whatever around it, that's where we have the best of it and the worst of it, and it's kind of all mixed
That's
up,
right.
and we have to sort out what's worth keeping and bringing
That's right.
forwards, and what to kind of decondition from.
That's
And
right.
then there's the North Node point, which represents what hasn't been modeled for us in healthy ways, or what doesn't make sense, or
That's
like
right.
what's kind of been left out of the picture for us, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
And is it that it's been left out entirely, or that we just haven't seen healthy or functional examples of it?
I think that's a good way. I always use healthy models, but I think bringing in functional is really good, and I'll probably steal that from you.
Mm-hmm.
And consistent also, because it's so what I often say is you've seen unhealthy models, but yeah, maybe not so functional models too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can guarantee you, if you have a South Node in Libra, when you have that means you have a North Node in Aries, you have had negative examples of anger, whether it's overdone or underdone. You've had negative examples of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Capricorn North Node. I've seen negative examples of Capricorn / Saturn stuff. And because people in my family are like, you don't do that. It's the opposite. So I've seen negative stuff about it. And then I've seen all kinds of positive and negative about Cancerian stuff, moon stuff. But yeah, you can just look at the North Node sign and you can know that person may not have a template in his or her head about what that could look like in a healthy way.
And probably has caricatures and prejudices and
That's right.
negative impressions built up, and
Yeah.
that even deter the person from wanting to find a healthy relationship to it, because it seems like they've had all these like, I can't go that way because that way has all these unhealthy
Yeah.
potentials around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's I mean, I think of my dad as not a negative example of Saturn, but maybe I could have used a different kind of functional example. But like he had the same job for decades, Capricorn North Node in the fourth, same job for decades. He had this routine every day that was a work day. He had a certain routine, and I just remember the hairspray because he was a salesman and a radio DJ, and he was always out in public, like doing stuff with crowds of people and emceeing events and doing remotes at car dealerships and stuff. So his hair was always perfect, and I was like, how expletiving boring, like the same get up every day at 4:15, every day you're at the office at 5:30, every day you do this, and I was like, oh, which is a version of Capricorn consistency. But like that was as much of Capricorn as I saw him do. And my mom was a very Uranian person, so she did not have a Capricornian example for me. Most people in my family are very Uranian people, so they're all over the place sometimes. But anyway, I just had that example. I was always like, oh my God, I never want to do that because got the same thing every day. It seems so boring to me. But then as I grew up, having examples of Saturn that other people brought me, I was like, that's weird. Like a music teacher who like really paid attention to me. I was like, why are you paying attention to me? Because I wasn't used to that with my own dad. Mm-hmm. And so, like mentoring, that kind of thing, teaching and mentoring. So we sometimes don't know what to do with the opposite, but we're challenged to learn to grow into it.
And we'll have transits to our North Node, and people will show up
That's
that
right,
have relation to our North Node, or something to teach us about our North Node, whether it's what does or what doesn't work, or a mix thereof.
That's right.
And That's so right. Life invites us into a discovery process around what a healthy version of our North Node can look like for us.
That's right. And that's why I recommend looking at keyword lists, multiple keyword lists, and deciding to be open to some different examples of how things can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially regarding that North Node stuff. Like the South Node, do that process to look at what the potential excesses are you don't notice in yourself, blind spots. And then the North Node, do the same, the keyword list on the opposite side to be aware of examples you might tune out normally and just kind of shrug off. So I don't know anything about that.
Do we ever get all the way there, or is it like Pluto, where there's we learn more, but other aspects of it show themselves to us over time as well, and it's a continual journey?
Yeah, we never get there.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean we're not succeeding. It means there are different, opportunities through different phases of life. But part of you may always remain clueless and uninterested in it. But then different things in life call it out. Like I started to understand some things about it a little bit, little baby steps, dipping the toe in the water. And then I met my partner 12 years ago, and she moved in with me, and she'll never let me forget that in the in the kitchen there was just this shelf, and I don't know why, but like a pair of shoes was on the shelf. It was like super high. The pair of shoes was in there, a pair of running shoes. And then the rest of the stuff in the kitchen was all kitchen stuff. She'll never let me forget this like bachelor thing, right? But in that moment, we were also going to like stores and buying like cleaning supplies as she imagined cleaning supplies should be. And I remember being in the dollar store or wherever it was, with the cart was full, and there was this woman who just moved in with me, fourth house Capricorn North Node. And I froze. I mean, I was in a panic and I froze because that had never happened before. I'd lived with somebody before, but it just wasn't the same. Like this cart full of things where I need some things for cleaning supplies, but I don't need like a cart full, and it symbolized home in a certain way that freaked me out because my North Node's in the fourth house. And anyway, so, and before she moved in, it had been a live work studio. So like I would sleep and then I would work and then I would eat, and I had multiple like utensils, but I like this fork. I like that spoon. I use this bowl. And when it's done, I clean them later. So it's like very minimalist, which is a way to do Capricorn in the fourth house, minimal. But anyway, and then Capricorn rising lady moves in and everything changes. And so, like I was challenged to kind of like get into a different groove. Mm-hmm. And because in space organization, time organization, living in a studio with another person, all these things I had to deal with now. I have a family member living with me, so to speak. So anyway, but that was when I was, in my late 30s. Well, 12 years later, now I'm 50, and there are different challenges. And as now there's stuff with other family members and how consistent I can be in interacting with them. Mm-hmm. So it changes over time.
Mm-hmm. We learn different aspects of it. We get some things down and integrated, but there's always more to evolve towards or to integrate. It's like we're not going to be our North Node sign at the end of the lifetime. It's a point in our chart that provides evolution and things to learn and things to integrate, but it's not like we're supposed to be it to,
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
We don't win. But we also remember are over conditioned regarding the South Node, and therefore we're learning to balance the South Node with the North Node. So that process is always ongoing. In addition to that, just nature of different experiences and different chapters of life.
Mm-hmm. Not about getting all the way there, but about learning and evolving through having that particular setup.
That's right. Being able to live in that part of the chart and being able to live in any other part of the chart too. That's really the key.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else in the chart says something has been left out. The North Node says something has been left out of your training and your education, your conditioning. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we'll work on that over time in different ways.
That's right. That's right.
I think there can be sometimes this idea that we're supposed to become our North Node, and seeing it through this in this other way of like, you're supposed to learn about you're not even supposed to.
Yeah.
You're invited to learn about your North Node.
That's right. That's right.
But you are the rest of your chart as well.
Mm-hmm.
Your sun is still your sun.
Yeah.
Your everything is still your everything, and you're learning potentially about your North Node.
The way you said the first part of that made me think of something. What did you say? You said not that you should become it. You're invited to become it. And I just when we
You're
think
invited
about
to
these,
learn about it.
yeah, you're supposed to. You are learning about it. Whether you're flowing with that or not flowing, you are learning. But the sense of judgment, I should be better with that. Well, everybody listen to this. Have compassion that your South Node is overdone, and you've had a tremendous amount of conditioning regarding it. And from before you could talk or even see straight or process language, certain energies and attitudes were modeled for you that have to do with the South Node. So give yourself a break if you really overdo your South Node and are not aware of it. Don't judge yourself because it's natural.
Oh, that's good. So let's wind down and look at the just understanding the transiting nodes and how to think about them as different from the personal nodes.
Mm-hmm. The personal nodes are your personal reservoir of assumptions about the world. Now, this transiting node idea, I take coming from me, it's like third hand. So I am not the progenitor or master of this teaching. But the idea seems to be transiting South Node can activate issues, and we might become somewhat distracted by the transiting South Node's placement and symbolism, what it might touch in our chart or whatever. But even just being in Scorpio, right? We're dealing with Scorpio stuff coming up. And then a remedy is the Taurus opposite. The transiting North Node symbolism would be the remedy or medicine, so to speak, the remedy. So if you think about any sign pair, any sign axis, they have opposite ways of approaching things. And so if Scorpio's overly activated, there's drama. The Taurian solution is doing one thing at a time and calming down. If the Scorpio thing is excessive or obsessive, worry, anxiety, whatever, the Taurian medicine is slowing down, focusing on the essentials, and doing one thing at a time. See, there's a pattern. Because the drama of Scorpio, Taurus has no use for it. So Taurus always wants to come forward and say, relax, it's okay. And Taurus says you can't think straight if you are living inside a tornado of emotions. So ground yourself, be practical, do one thing at a time. Rub your feet, slow down. Anyway.
So the birth placements are the conditioning and then what we're invited to learn, and the transiting nodes that move around every 18 years they make a complete navigation of the chart, and they can that can be what we're collectively working through. Like, okay, for this year and a half, we're gonna look at the excesses of this part of the chart or of this sign, and then we're invited to learn collectively and individually in our own charts about this other area during this time too, and it evolves and it activates placements in our own charts too, right? So as the South Node goes over our Mars or our Sun or something, we can look at excesses that we have been kind of gathered through our experience around those parts of ourselves and have a chance to clean them up. Or if the North Node transits something, we can have a chance to be shown possibilities around a part of ourselves. Is that, just to kind of throw out a
I like
picture of it.
Yeah. So it's collective and individual. And I was just thinking, when the transiting South Node, they by the way, they move in reverse. They're retrograde in motion.
Yeah.
So right now it's an early Scorpio, meaning it's 18.6 months is almost over. Before that it was in Sagittarius, before that Capricorn. So when it's going through Capricorn, this phrase big tech and the concern about big tech and these companies, they're too big, and this monolith that is Facebook, all that kind of stuff was constantly being churned. Then we got into the conspiracy theories of transiting South Node in Sagittarius. So the negative potentials about belief were overstimulated in a certain way. The remedy with that was logic and facts, data, Gemini. But anyway, now Scorpio stuff, a lot of stuff coming up about disempowerment, power, sexuality stuff, all kinds of things. But also the transgender kids, medical care, rights, bathroom stuff, sports. It's been happening for years, but it's louder and louder and louder because of the scorpionic undercurrents that certain people are afraid of. Like what, like, you know, if we accept that, then some people may think, then we're accepting that there aren't just two genders. And wait a minute, their own fears about themselves or others. How can I trust whatever, you know, like how can I can't have some person who's not a real man in the men's locker room. Like that kind of argument that goes with this, or like our kids aren't safe. And because who knows if that person's really a woman or whatever, you know, whatever. All those fears, the scorpionic undercurrents are activated. And if you're paying attention to reality, it's not an issue, but the fears are stimulated. So I can't wait till the transiting nodes move. I don't know, but I'll pay attention to. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, in future episodes, like what the current events are with that. But
yeah, and if you look on our Patreon, there's there are forecasts and stuff where we've talked about the nodes somewhat, and we've given an overview of of later this year when they're going to change signs into Libra and Aries, and I'm hearing that the transiting nodes, they bring up these themes for us collectively, and then they're also aspecting stuff in our own charts, and they're lighting up houses in our charts, and so there's the collective journey with them, and then there's also our personal unfolding evolution as well. And
cool.
Yeah, I guess that's a lot to digest with Pluto and the nodes in one episode, so we'll leave off there and be back. Go ahead.
Mr. Mitchell.
Oh, right.
Mr. Mitchell. Okay.
I hear you, Mr. Jacobs. So, actually, before we wrap up for the day, Tom brought something that he'd like to show to the class.
To share with the whole class. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're cupcakes. No. If you want more on Pluto and the nodes, here are some resources, because I've spent a lot of years developing stuff. Well, first I'll say there's a live webinar workshop that's going to go on in a couple months called the Pluto Healing Intensive webinar. It starts July 15th. And it's a mix of personal Pluto interpretation and counseling for you, plus also learning in a group environment with a couple dozen people in small groups, effective ways to deal with Pluto, how to face the fears, how to do shadow work, how to do all those things, how to become empowered, how to understand coming out of the disempowerment. So that's an amazing thing. I did it last year. It was fantastic. I'm doing it again this year. Number 2, my Soul's Journey, the Soul's Journey trilogy of books about Pluto and the nodes and my whole karmic story analysis thing. And there are 3 volumes. The first one lays out the whole thing. The second one, I do a workshop with a transcription of a workshop with a half dozen people about their stories. And so that's really instructive, but dialoguing with them about their karmic journeys and teaching them how to resolve stuff. And then the third book is 19 of my own other life or past life stories with my one chart. So you see how themes recur and how this symbol, square the nodes or whatever, can show up in different lifetimes. And then the last thing is home study courses, astrology, evolutionary astrology fundamentals 1 and 2 from the Learn Astrology page on my site. And those are, if you want to study with me, study this kind of astrology, that's where to begin. My site talks about an astrology school that is not yet fully formed, but if you do want to study with me in the future, that's where to begin, the EA Fundamentals 1 and 2 home study courses.
Right on. Okay, so then we'll let you explore that if you'd like to, and we'll be back for more, probably on these topics in the future if things go according to our roadmap, and also heading into the houses, I think, for the next couple episodes.
Great.
And so, thank you for tuning in, and have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.